Let's get to a word of God. We have a lot to talk about today as we are continuing our message from last week. And we anchored ourselves in a text. And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. I am switching into my teaching mode. I want to give us some information that I believe is going to be not only important for the next week's service, back to church, but it's going to be a very important message here on out. If we ever want to grow this church, if we want to win our loved ones, our family members, our friends over to the kingdom, then I'm going to lay out some principles that are going to better affect that. So it's one of those messages that you really want to take into your soul and make it a part of your thinking. Back to Church Sunday is something that the churches across America, as well as other nations, where they make an all-out effort to try to reclaim some of the people that have been in church and have drifted away. Some people have been in church for years and years, and you look around and they're not there anymore. So what happened? What's going on? Why did they leave? And we're going to talk about that today. It is said that most people who do come to church come as a result of an invitation, a simple invitation. Would you like to come to church with me? Now, everyone that you ask obviously is not going to come to church with you. But the ones that do come to church, they come mostly because somebody asked them. We started to talk about why people leave the church in the first place, and we're going to review some things. We talked about the value of big events. A big event is something that the church will do in an all-out effort to gather a lot of people. Now, it doesn't have to be hundreds of people. When we talk about we want to plan something that's going to fall in line with a big event, whether it be a cookout or a special service or a guest speaker, we're under no illusion that we're going to get 500 people packed in here. A big event for us simply means an above average attendance. If you can get a lot of people at one time, that can be a very strategic maneuver for gaining people, new people, as well as reclaiming people. We talked about how the early church, the first church, was actually born in a big event. The day of Pentecost was a Jewish festival. Pentecost is not named after the Pentecostal church. It was a Jewish festival. And in Acts, the birth of the church, it says when the day of Pentecost had come, they were all gathered in one place. That's not unusual because it was a big event. It was a big happening. So everybody was in town that day. You go on, it says when they heard the sound occur, this is when the Spirit of God came upon 120 people. It says the crowds came together. So what's happening is the church was born. The Spirit of God came in the context of a big crowd. There were a lot of people around. And it goes on as Peter preached the word and he gave the gospel. It says, so then those who received his word were baptized, and that day were added about 3,000 souls. So there is a value and a strategy in having big events. Now, we talked about what some of those events could be. The American church, our modern church, and historical church for that matter, already has a couple of big events already built in. Christmas and Easter. Obviously, those are big days for the church. And it is no surprise that most churches get their biggest attendance on those days. And then we talked about some of those things. You can have Christmas Eve service, which is what we do here, or the Christmas before service. Or Christmas Eve, you can have Christmas dinners or parties. You can have a Good Friday service. This is something that we did. And then there's a bunch of other days that you can take advantage of. Other holidays. Mother's Day is a big day. We can have cookouts, movie nights. Movie nights, we don't show Pulp Fiction and things like that. But there were churches that got together to show the Passion of the Christ. The History Channel ran a series on the Bible. Churches opened up their doors and invited people to come in to watch the History Channel series on the Bible. Why did they do that? They're trying to create big event days. There's plays, there's concerts, there's seminars, guest speakers. The National Day of Prayer is a big day, and we did that as well. Now, I neglected to mention last week, you are not expected to be at every single big day. You're not expected to make all of them. We understand that. And it's important for me to say that because I thought about this last week, and I figured I might have scared some of you folks thinking like, wow, this guy has a real agenda here. And you're thinking, I can't be at all those things. And then you end up being one of the reasons why people leave the church. So it's like having cable TV. You have 160 channels. Well, you're not expected to watch all of them. It's just to have it available. We would hope that we get, obviously, the most participation from the true brickers. Brickers, by the way, is what we call ourselves from the Brick Church. We would hope that we would get full participation from our church. But we do understand, do not leave here with anxiety thinking Rev's going to kill us with all of these big events and full calendars. Along with the big event is Back to Church Sunday. This is an opportunity to get an above average crowd. Doesn't have to be hundreds of people. Doesn't even have to be double of what we are. But if we can get more than usual, it's an opportunity to get them into the building and reach out to them. Crowds attract crowds. Folks walk into a church and they see 5 people. They think something's wrong here and they're not very comfortable and you'll never get a momentum. Big days is an opportunity for you to establish yourself and hopefully get a momentum going. We asked the question, how can we make our church grow? This is what was basically asked of me when I came on months ago. And we've been working on that. But the better question is, what's stopping our church from growing? It's not always what can we do. Oftentimes it's what do we need to stop doing or what should we start doing? Why isn't our church growing? And we talked about the necessity of closing the back door, so to speak. Okay, this means you can have people that will come in on a constant basis, but for every 3 people that come in, 1 ends up dropping out. For every 3 people that come in, 2 people drop out. And you have no growth. And then after a year, 2 years, you see that you really are no more than you started some 2 years ago. You may have different people than you did 2 years ago, but you have the same amount of people. Why does that happen? And it happens all the time. You see churches that, even larger churches, they're 500 people, and there's never more than 500 people. 8 years later, there's still 500 people. There are different 500 people. They hit a ceiling. Why does that happen? Well, we talked about one of the reasons that happens is churches intentionally and sometimes unintentionally, most of the time unintentionally, set thermostats for their church. Just like a house thermostat, when you set it, that means it will never get any warmer than what you set it for. It will never get any cooler than what you set it for. That's what thermostats do. And there are churches that have set thermostats in their church, emotional thermostats, spiritual thermostats, so that the church will never grow because you have set it many times unintentionally, many times unconsciously. But until you discover why and where you set that thermostat, you will put a ceiling upon your church. And you can be doing the same thing for 10 years and you'll never get much more than what you have. There are actually people that are thermostats in your church. Like I said, don't look at each other. There are certain people that serve as a thermostat, and their influence, their presence, their mannerisms, their ways about them that discourage and hinder growth and can actually produce people leaving. That's why sometimes when people leave your church, it's the best thing that can happen to your church. Because not that you don't love them, doesn't even mean that they're not saved or anything like that. It just means that the person has set a thermostat. And because that person or people, their ways, it will hinder the growth. Now, I talked about my experience last week. Me and Mr. Bogert are from New York City. And it's a very, very crowded, busy city. Millions of people. There's people everywhere. Like I said, this is not a festival or a block party going on here. This is what a street can look like any given day. There's just lots and lots of people there. And because there's so many people and you have such a diversity, you have lots and lots of churches. Back in my day, which is decades ago, you had a church on just about every corner. In every neighborhood, you have many kinds of churches. And there are all kinds of churches. In New York City, you can find a church for anything you want to believe. If you want to shack up with your boyfriend, there's churches that you can go and do that. It's not right, but there are lots of churches. But because I grew up in this environment, I have more exposure and experience than probably most people, particularly in suburban churches. Doesn't mean that I know more. It doesn't make me any smarter. Please understand that's not what I'm trying to say. It just means that I've had the opportunity to see lots of things. And it also means that because I've had these kinds of wide range of experiences, I have made many of the mistakes that I'm going to talk about this morning. I've done the things that I'm talking about this morning and that I'm cautioning about this morning. In New York City, and it's not unique to New York, obviously, you can have them in Providence, they're very small churches. There's large churches and there's small churches. These are actually called storefront churches. For obvious reason, they are literally storefronts. They're little corner stores that are converted into churches. You think the Brick is a small church. You have some very, very small churches there. And the insides, and I've been in churches, I've preached in churches like this, where the congregation can be as little as 3 people. And I'm talking about the pastor, his wife, and his sister. There are churches that as little as 3 people. I've been in churches with 5 people, 25 people. Some storefront churches, 75 people. And many of them don't grow much beyond that. They stay small for years and years. And then you also have the big churches. There are several big churches. Again, I was part of an international organization. The headquarters for that church was in New York City. That church had seated about 2,000 people. It was one of my churches there. And that was long before the phenomena of the mega church. That was the mega church of the 70s. My wife and I, a couple of years back, visited one of these mega churches in New York City. And this church that we went to had a membership of 30,000 people. 30,000 people. They'd have 5 services. So you have a wide range of churches in their attendance, their size. So when you would see the large church, and oftentimes would ask, what are you doing? How are you getting this? What's happening? Why are you gathering so many people? You always get the same answers. It's God. It's just the Lord. And it's true. Obviously, it is all God. But the question comes, is God not in these churches? Why does God seem to be blessing this congregation? And it doesn't seem to be happening in that congregation. Could it be that congregations like this have thermostats? They've hindered and limited their growth because of the way they're doing, the way they are thinking. Let me give you an illustration of the thinking that we have. This is some home I found online. And we've all done this. We've drove by one of these big, glorious houses, whether it's in Barrington or Newport. And how many times have we drove by a house such as this and say, what do they need all that house for? That's ridiculous. I don't understand why anybody would need a house like that. What are you doing? Guess what kind of house you'll never have? Because you've already talking yourself into it. You've already despising this kind of lifestyle. Now, again, this is an illustration because I'm not trying to say everybody should look for a big house. But it's that kind of thinking. And that's the kind of thinking that happens in churches. I've seen people look at things like this and despise them, criticize them. Yeah, well, are they preaching the word? Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But the storefront church may be preaching the word and maybe not either. Okay, so we start to despise. We don't dream. We don't have vision. We don't anticipate a big God. And we limit ourselves to this is about as big as we're going to get. This is about as good as it gets. I'm going to give 6 reasons why people leave the church. Now, again, like I said last week, people can leave the church and do leave the church for 1,000 reasons. And I believe I heard them all. I'm sure there's more coming. But they can leave for 1,000 different reasons. What I mean by this is that most people, I would say 80% of people that do leave the church are going to leave for one of these 6 reasons. I want to lay them out for you. But before, a couple of things that we should understand. Never assume that when people leave the church that the problem is theirs. People leave the church and right away we assume that they're backsliding. They don't love God. They prefer something less. And that may not be the case. It may be you are the reason why they're leaving. It's not always their fault that you lose people. Sometimes it's our fault. Sometimes things that we are doing result in people leaving. And it's important for us to grab a hold of and understand. Otherwise, you'll see people come and go, and every time they go, it's, well, they really love the Lord, they'd be here. Like I showed the clip last week, they can't handle the truth. You make these assumptions because everyone that leaves your church doesn't mean they are leaving the church. There are people that will leave your church, they love God more than you. It may be something that you're doing. So let's look at 6 reasons why people leave the church. The first reason we started to touch on, and it's a big reason, is it's a bad match. There's just your way of doing church just does not set with them. Now, that goes to style and structure. And I just ran through some of the things that characterizes churches, and all of these serve as reasons why people would leave. They're using the King James Version. There are people that will be upset because they're using the King James Version. Then you have people that are upset because they don't use the King James Version. You have people that prefer verse-by-verse preaching, expository preaching. So you get a book of the Bible and you go every week, you go verse by verse. I've known churches that do this and they stay in one book for 5 years. Some that would do shorter series. But there are many people who feel like if you're not doing that, you're not preaching the word. The preacher's just talking whatever he wants to talk about. He's just using Bible verses just to illustrate his points. And so they'll want to know, are you doing expository preaching? And if you're not, they won't like that. Then you got people that like topical preaching. And you got people who don't like topical preaching. You have people that have a preference for church government, a pastor-led church. What I mean by pastor-led church, I'm not talking about a cult. I'm talking about where you have a pastor, and it doesn't have to be one pastor, but you have a pastor. He's the one that will cast the vision, that will lead the congregation. And while he may have consultation from board members, church members, or comrades that he has, he basically leads the church, specifically in spiritual matters. On the other hand, you like people that have a congregation-led church. They want to vote on everything, including the sermons that are going forth. And they want monthly meetings, weekly meetings. They want to know what the preacher's going to do, what he's going to wear, what time we're going to do service, all of those things. And everybody gets a vote. All church members get a vote. And they prefer that. Now, by the way, most of these things you get from other church people. People that come in with these kind of issues, usually they come from other churches. And now they're in your church, and they want you to start doing things the way they did back in their church. All of these people, by the way, see this as all the Bible. This is what the Bible is. If you're living for God and you're following the Bible, it would look like any one of these items. There are people that prefer hymns. There are people that prefer contemporary music. And for those who are married to any one of those, no matter how much you try to do in between, it's never enough. These are the various differences. People that come in because the church is too big. This is ridiculous. I can never know anybody here. It's just too many people. It's too busy, too congested. I got to get out of here. You have churches come in because the church is too small. I walk into church, I feel like I'm in somebody's living room. This is not working for me. And people leave because there's nothing to do. There's really nothing happening around here. Nothing much to talk about. Then there's people who leave, there's too much to do. Pastor got all this big day events, things going on, and it's too much. Yeah, people, because there's too much talk about a building. Every time I come in, they're talking about the carpet. They're talking about the pews. They're talking about the parking arrangements. They're talking about too much talk about the building. People, too much talk about politics. And I'm not even going to go there, Don. Every time there's just something about politics. There's somebody who's president, what the latest policy is, and what's going on in news and what have you. The people, not enough talk against homosexuals. All the gay talk going on, why aren't we hearing this every Sunday? This is ridiculous. Well, he never talks about that. That people talk too much about money. Every time I turn around, they're hitting my pocketbook. Not enough talk about abortion. Another important thing. There are people that they feel that you're not hitting on their topics, and so it discourages them. Not enough about helping the poor. It's all about us, and we're not thinking about homeless people. We're not thinking about hungry people. There's nothing to do for kids. There's nothing to do for seniors. Too much talk about money. Nothing for single moms. Nothing for vets. Too much talk about money. They said the preacher's too boring. The preacher's too wild. We lose a lot of them for that. And then, of course, people feel there's just too much talk about money. So these have to do with your style and your structure. Now, there are some people, they will never change their style and structure, and these are those thermostats. Okay, this is the way we did it. This is the way Jesus did it, and this is the way we're going to do it. People who get locked into that kind of mode have set a thermostat and understand that you will never get any more people other than people like you. Then there are those who try to change their style for everybody. And so they're always listening to the latest trend, the latest fad, the latest happening, the latest idea. and they try to incorporate, and now they're always changing their styles. So there's a necessary balance there. You can be a church for anybody, and you should be a church for anybody, but you're never going to be a church for everybody. Anybody is welcomed here at the Brick, but everybody is not going to like the Brick. And that's something that we need to challenge ourselves on. How much do we try to adapt and to change and to satisfy everybody? And so many churches, pastors lose touch of their vision because they're just trying to please everybody. They're trying to be a church for everybody. And that's a big mistake that many people make. This is a local congregation in this region. It's in Attleboro. It's an up-and-coming church, and it's very different than any of the things and most churches around here. As you can see, it's dark, it's loud, it looks like a concert hall. The music is loud, and as you can see, they're singing gospel songs, but it does not look like your traditional church. And this church, this particular congregation, is always criticized. That's terrible. That's not the way you do church. They have fog machines over here. I mean, it's just a really different kind of church. But the church is packed out. Young people are just flocking to this church. Now, it's certainly not the Rev, and it's not the kind of church that God would use me for. But is it the right church for certain people? Is it for young people? Is there anything wrong with this church appealing to their crowd? And I believe that's what they would say. When you come in there and they say, well, it's too dark, no one's wearing a tie. I believe their response is, we're not trying to reach you. We're trying to reach young people. Again, this is where that tension comes in. And if you have problems with that, you can end up hindering your church because you're not going to be a church for everybody. Anyone ought to be able to come in. I don't care what their background is, what their religious background is. I certainly don't care what their sin is. They are invited. I will be in trouble when I start to take a position, when we start to take a position where you're not invited in this church. You're not welcomed here. You don't look right. We don't want your kind of people here. When you take that posture, and you can take it aggressively or covertly, when you take that posture, you got a problem with God. Jesus risked his reputation to reach sinners. Jesus was criticized. You hang around too many whores, too many harlots, too many publicans. And he was okay with that. He was willing to risk being labeled a bad Jew because he wanted to win souls. If you're more concerned about how you look or what people are going to say about you because you're trying to reach certain people, then you may be setting a thermostat for your church as well as your own personal growth. The second reason why people would leave is sin. And that may be a very obvious one. There are people that will come in and they could be in the church for a long time. And sooner or later they will fall into sin. Now, this can be a very tricky one. I used to love this show, House. I just kind of identified with him. He was a genius. He could figure out stuff that no one else could get a handle on. But he was also kind of twisted. Again, do the math. He had a motto that everybody lies. So he was a doctor. He would not talk to patients because he figured, I don't need to talk to them. I'm not going to get a straight answer from them. So he would make most of his diagnosis never even see the patient, which was radical for other doctors. Why aren't you talking to them? Why don't you ask that person what's going on in their life? Everybody lies. You're not going to get a straight answer from them. Well, that is what happens when people fall into sin. So when people leave your church because of sin, and you run into them and you say, hey, haven't seen you in a while, they're probably not going to tell you, yeah, well, I'm kind of shacked up with my boyfriend again. That's why I dropped out of church. You're not going to hear those things. You're not going to hear that, yeah, I just kind of backslid and I'm a party animal now. I like getting high. That's why I'm not going to church. What you will hear is, yeah, I left the church because of style and structure. And they'll start itemizing, throwing these things back to, yeah, I left the church. There's just nothing for kids. You know, I got 3 teenage boys and there's nothing at your church for that. And I've seen pastors go to respond to that. And they'll go back to the church. Oh my God, we're losing people because we don't have a teens ministry. So let's build a teens ministry because you think that's why that person left. No, the person left because they're shacked up with their boyfriend. But they're going to tell you something's wrong with your style and structure. And so pastors will spend all their time trying to change stuff, trying to create stuff, thinking that's why people left. Do you follow what I mean? What do you do? What is the response? How do you get people back who have fallen off because of sin? You have to have a culture of grace. We all can fall short. Any one of us can fall. Your church needs to have a culture and an atmosphere of grace. The Bible says where sin did abound, grace did much more abound. I don't care how many times somebody falls, they are always welcomed back home. And they need to feel welcomed back home. Doesn't mean that we condone their sin. We certainly don't. But we never want to get to a point where we feel that you've sinned one too many times for us and we don't want you back. So when people fall into sin, they need to feel that they can come back here, that they can come back home. I got to move on. Disruptions of life. We lose a lot of people to disruptions of life. Things happen in people's lives. They can be good disruptions. They could be bad disruptions. They're not all bad. Good things can cause people to leave your church. You can have babies. That's a disruption. That's a break in your routine. You can have financial problems. We've seen a slew of people that have actually lost their homes. People lost their jobs. They have to work 2 jobs. Illnesses come in their family with them or other family members. People move. This is a big one because if they've been coming to your church for 10 years, but they live 3 blocks away, now they live 40 minutes away, it's going to be hard to reclaim that person back into your church. People get married. People divorce or relationships. You don't have to be married to be in a relationship and have it broken. I've seen this happen a dozen times in church, more than a dozen times. You get a brother comes into the church, he gets saved. A sister comes into the church and gets saved. They hook up, their boyfriend and girlfriend. You're thinking, beautiful, you're on your way to a whole new family. They break up. I guarantee one of them is going to leave the church. Most of the time, both of them leave the church. So you see couples come together and you think it's a good thing, well, hold your breath. It's not over yet. The same thing holds true with marriages. You see couples that get divorced, one of them will leave the church, if not both of them, because it's just hard to overcome. Stresses, everyday stresses of life, things that happen on their jobs, and devastations, just people that are hurting, in pain, all these kinds of things. What do you do? How do you reclaim people that leave because of a disruption? Many, many people leave because of that. They took on another job, and now they're working 2 jobs. They have stress. They're trying to catch up with their bills. The family's a wreck. And now as these things pile up, church becomes less and less and less important to them, and they end up dropping off. One of the ways to counter this is anticipation. What is wisdom? Wisdom is the ability to anticipate a consequence. Very seldom do divorces just happen overnight. They may look like they just happen overnight, but they usually are oncoming trains. Babies don't happen overnight. There's lots of things that you can see coming. The church should anticipate those things. A woman's having a baby, a family's having a baby. Well, anticipate. Don't wait until they're too distracted with the baby, and now they're trying to do this. Be there with the change that they're going through. Be there with people that are going through their stresses. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to rescue them from their stresses, but just let them know that you know that they're going through something and you want to be there with them. Then when the bottom falls out, the church is a refuge for them. You've been there for them. So you're one of the last people that they want to leave. They want to stick with you because you stuck with them. Another way, a big way to reclaim people who have been pulled away from distractions is big events. That's a way to go back to those people who have fallen off because they lost their job, they fell out of fellowship, they haven't been in church, and now it's a pattern, and it's just been a long time, and they just never got back. A big event, like Back to Church Sunday, is a good opportunity to bring them back. Let's move on. Another reason, people will leave for a bad experience. People have bad experiences in churches. I've been in churches where fistfights have broken out. There are just some things. You could be with somebody, someone just talked to you wrong, someone offended you, something happened, and it became a bad experience for them, and they left the church. It could be a serious thing, and I've seen some very serious things. And some of those things, if they're too serious, you can't reclaim them. You think about child abuse, things like that happen in churches, bad experiences. You will probably never reclaim things like that. But then there are other things, just certain things that happen. We offend each other. We offend one another. We say things. We do things. We fail to do things that will bring offenses. How do we overcome that? It's with humility. Followers of Christ must be willing to give up their right to be offended. They must give up their right to be right. If being right or being offended is more important than reclaiming your brother, you're going to have a problem. You have to be willing to understand, if I've offended you, I am sorry.
I forgot my key.
Jenny, I'm sorry.
Don't. Love means never having to say you're sorry.
But the reality is, love means having to say you're sorry a lot. Love means having to say you're sorry even when you didn't do anything. And I've seen this happen so many times. You've offended that person. Well, I didn't do it. Well, they need to know I didn't do it. They're wrong. So it's more important for you to be right than it is to reclaim that person. So learn, I'm sorry. If I've offended you, then I'm sorry. Reason number 5, disconnection. This is one of the biggest reasons why people leave the church, and it's one of the most fixable items in the list. We talked last week about why people leave the church and how they leave the church. The first time that they will leave, it's usually how they got here. But this second time, which occurs within 6 months, they leave because they're disconnected. They may love the church. They may love the music. They may love your style and structure. But after 6 months or so, I just don't know anybody. I'm just a face in the crowd. I don't know any more people than when I first got there, because the only time I talk to them is when I'm in church. And that is superficial. Hi, how are you? So good to see you. See you next week. And it never goes on beyond that. How many people remember Jimmy Swaggart? Back in the 80s, he was a big mega church preacher. He fell from grace. He messed up. He sinned. And he had a very large church. Many of the people left that church there. And we had the opportunity to talk to some of the people that went to his church during this time. And it was profound, the answers that we got. They said that, yes, many people did leave the church, but the people that left were there for Jimmy, because he was one of those wild preachers. And so they left because of him. But the people that stayed because this is where my family is. My friends are here. My prayer partners are here. The people that have been with me during my struggles are here. So where am I going to go? So that kind of connection is what keeps people. We talked about how we view newcomers. And we talked about the 3 Sunday rule. When you see people that have missed 3 Sundays in a row for no real apparent reason. I'm not talking about vacation. I'm not talking about the car broke down. I'm not talking about illness. But for 3 Sundays in a row, they are usually gone within 1 year. Well, you can do something about that. Because if you see somebody and they disappear and you see them again, let them know that you noticed that they weren't there. You missed them. Now, again, not where were you last Sunday? You weren't here. You don't want to sound like a cop. But you want to sound, sorry, Andy. But you want to show concern. Because what happens is you're in the church, particularly, and the longer you're in the church, the more noticeable it is, the more devastating it is. I've been in the church for 5 years. I lost my job and fell out of sync, haven't been in church for 3 weeks. Not one person called me. And then you know what the devil says? They don't care about you. You could die. They wouldn't even know it. When you get that feeling, why should I stay? Why should I struggle to stay in the church? And people leave. Learn to value new people. Not everyone that comes in is going to look like you. Not everyone that comes in is going to be like you. Your church will never grow without new people. So learn to value them. New people tend to be the most excited. When the pastor throws up a big event, they're like, yeah. The old folks, the folks that have been around for a long time, they're like, here he goes again. We're doing that again? So new people are the most excited. New people are open to new ideas. New people are least resistant to change. Pastor comes in, we're going to do something new. We're going to do this. It's all the old people that are miserable. Why we got to do that? We never had to do that before. Why we got to do that now? The new people, they're like, yeah, let's do that. What are we waiting for? So new people bring this energy. New people make the best volunteers. And this here I've seen in hundreds of churches, because they actually have, many churches, the 6-month rule, which says, and if you've been in church a while, you know you cannot participate in any ministries until you've been in the church for 6 months. So you can't sing in the choir, you can't be an usher, you can't do all those things because you need to be here, you need to be a member for at least 6 months. Why is that so dumb? Because what do we say? After 6 months, if they're not connected, they're gone anyway. The last reason is people will leave the church for boredom. The church can get very mundane routine. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because routine lends to stability. When we live in a chaotic world, and if your life is chaotic, you like to come in to something that's familiar, something that you know is going to be there. So you want a level of consistency, but you also need a level of variety. When you see people in the congregation, the announcements go forth and everybody knows the announcements by heart. That's boredom. And what happens is church just gets so routine and so same old, they will drop out. So you want a level of variety. You can have consistency with variety. You have breakfast every day. That's consistent. But you don't have the same breakfast every day. You mix it up. So the church needs to, and a lot of churches don't grow because they have nothing new. It's the same thing. They know the announcements by heart. They know the same old songs by heart. Sometimes they know the sermons by heart. It's just nothing ever changes, and people will drop out because it's so boring. One of the things you can do about that is big events. Something different. It breaks up the routine, and it brings a new energy, and so back to church. I'm going to close on that again. The idea is to invite somebody.